Errol gets a mazel tov, everyone.
Hey, mazel tov. Okay, that's wonderful. Last night or overnight?
Yesterday, yeah.
So it was after we spoke.
No, before, but,
Didn't go.
so this, yeah, that's not to say.
Here. It's hard to get a word in with.
Yeah, we left together.
I know, she told me.
Someone that I used to work with was that.
And I think Cyril's there too. The whole thing came together.
Yeah.
Morning.
Still.
That's nice. Great question.
That person we didn't use your clothes.
Rabbi, what do you guys think?
It seems really good. And then you do.
That's a classic discussion in the Gemara.
Stuff like this.
Ein ase docha lo sase.
Who you to tell somebody, that's all I need to see.
It's easy. It's a couple questions. You're from home. I'm not sure. No, I am, that's this is,
Okay, let's get started. Kohen shemotze mitzia beveis hakvaros. If a Kohen finds a lost object or he spots a lost object in the cemetery, Kohen sheroes ha'aveda v'lo yochel lekachta kevin shehi beveis hakvaros. Right, this is a classic discussion in the Gemara that if a Kohen spots a lost item in a cemetery, let's say he sees his neighbor's goat wandering through the cemetery, and he wishes he could go and retrieve it, but he's not permitted to walk in the cemetery. He sees that it has a distinctive marker. He knows that it's someone's goat, and he knows that it's lost. Lo yitame la kedei lahachzir. He's not allowed to make himself tame to violate the Torah. Kevin diyesh isur lekohen leikonis lebeis hakvaros mipnei atuma, because he's not permitted. Ve'eno chayav bahashavasa liba'alim lefi shahashavas aveda hi mitzvah saseh. He says, and he's basically exempt from the mitzvah of hashavas aveda, because it's only hashavas aveda is a mitzvah saseh. Uvetuma lekohanim yesh aseh velo saseh. And the prohibition of a Kohen defiling himself carries with it both a positive and a negative commandment. Aseh shel kedoshim yihiyu v'lo saseh shel nefesh lo yitama be'amav. The positive commandment of you shall be holy, and the negative commandment of a person, the Kohen may not defile himself. Ve'ein aseh decha lo saseh v'aseh. And a positive commandment cannot override those two. There's a second reason that's brought in the poskim, even putting aside the formal argument of ein aseh docha lo saseh v'aseh, which is you don't override a mitzvah in order to save someone's money, right? In other words, in general, monetary law takes a backseat to what would this form of law be called in secular law? I don't know that we have a term. Yeah, prohibitive law, or Okay, next. Mitzia she'ein ba siman. If a lost item, you see something is lost, but it doesn't have any distinctive marker on it, the siman. Zaha klal ba'aveda kol davar she'ein bo siman. The general rule with lost items is that if it doesn't have a recognizable, a distinctive feature, kevin sha'avad v'yadu bo ha'ba'alim sha'avad hareza b'cheskas shenisyashu mimenu ba'alav. Right. So as long as the owner is aware that he's lost the item, and it doesn't have any distinctive marker, so then we assume that the owner has had yeyush, he's given up hope of retrieval. Kagon mismar echad o machad echad o matbea echad. Let's say if a guy loses a nail, like a nail that you hammer, or he loses a needle, or he loses a coin. Now, these things may also bring Yeush simply because a person doesn't find these things valuable enough to start looking for them or hoping to retrieve them. But let's say you live in a poor society. These are the examples that is given. Shaharei einon yecholim litain simila hachzir, because there's no distinctive feature that the owner could provide in order to retrieve the item. And therefore, even if you know that a Jew in all likelihood dropped it, you don't have any obligation to return it. Now, now let's say these are just the general rules, going over the most general of principles. And then we'll probably get into specific shilas like he did in the section for Geneva and Gezela. So you find the lost item, it has the siman, and you've announced it. You've placed posts in public areas. You clapped on the bima in shul, and you let people know that we found such and such a garment or whatever it is, and no one steps forward. Then the halacha standard is the finder has to keep the item until Eliyahu Hanavi comes, which means ad infinitum. Okay, and the finder is not allowed to use the item litzarcho for any personal use. Even if he can argue that this is beneficial to the lost item. Like, in other words, I need to use it so that it doesn't become stiff or that it doesn't become rusted or whatever it is. But if through that use that could also damage the item, you're not allowed to. But if it's something that does not cause any wear and tear, and normally someone who owns such an object wouldn't mind, some say that it would be permissible for just the finder to use it for personal use. So that's one side opinion.
Doesn't matter if the original owner was Jewish or not Jewish.
It does, but we haven't gotten to that point yet. But yes, we're working with the assumption that this is all the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda does not apply to non-Jews. It's a mitzvah that is based on the principle of there's a higher standard of chesed that Hashem requires a Jew to show to his fellow Jew than a Jew was required to show to his fellow human being. It doesn't mean that you don't get a mitzvah if you return a lost item to a non-Jew. It's just that there's no obligation. The Torah doesn't obligate you.
Well, how does that fit in with us being too so-called light to the nations? We're not being a light to the nations when we take that sort of.
Well, that's true, Ron. It's a valid point. There's a tension. There's always a tension between being a light unto the nations and also having an obligation to show greater loyalty to our fellow Jew. And the reason for that apparently is because, just like when you're part of a family, family takes care of family to a higher standard than family takes care of non-family. We're not suggesting that you should be callous and cruel to non-family, but the level of obligation, of compassion and care is not as great. Some cultures would disagree with this. Some cultures would say you have to treat each and every single human being the same way that you would treat a sibling or a parent. But apparently the Torah doesn't feel that that's realistic. That's just doesn't, it just doesn't work that way.
It's the same thing like charging by ribbas, like all these things are only meant for your fellow.
Right. Ribbis is also a mitzvah that only applies. And again, there's nothing evil in charging interest on a loan as long as it's not onerous interest. But there's a certain level of compassion that we're required to have for, let's say, a family member. Don't exploit a family member for personal gain. Don't ignore a family member's financial losses, right? Those are things that apply to family only. So, okay. Now, Matzah Aveda B'Shuk V'Harov Yisrael. If you find a lost item in the marketplace where you can assume that it fell from a Jew because the majority of passersby are Jewish, Misha Matzah Aveda B'Shuk Sheyesh Ba Siman Imrov HaKonim Yisraelim Chayiv La'achriz B'Imrov HaKonim Goyim Harehu Shel Hamotzei. Right? If you find a lost item in the marketplace, if the majority are Jewish, you have to announce it and try to find the owner. If not, if the majority are non-Jewish, you're not under obligation to seek out the person who lost it to give it back to him. Now, and then you would be allowed to keep it. But of course, if you have an opportunity to make a Kiddush Hashem, then you're supposed to do that as well. Okay, and he doesn't emphasize this point. I've mentioned this in the past. Remember, a lot of the texts that we study are written from people who live in Eretz Yisrael, and the one downside of living in Eretz Yisrael is that your exposure to non-Jews is usually not. Yeah, it's a lower number of people, and also you're not feeling the love usually. Yeah.
You could say the same thing about a lot of the Afronim, a lot of people, they lived in Europe and they're under pogroms and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's the stuff that comes from the Torah is harder to deal with because you can't use historical, the situation at that time was X, or
yeah.
there was
Yeah,
no
but if you
then, there was
listen,
nothing.
but look, if you look at the way that our Avos treated their non-Jewish counterparts, you see that it was always done with respect and compassion whenever possible. Just look at the way Avraham treated Malki Tzedek and the Melech Sodom and his servant Eliezer. And you see how Yaakov deals with Paro and Yosef deals with Paro. You can look at stories in Tanakh and see that interactions between Jews and non-Jews are always done with respect and treating other people with dignity. So that's our cue. That is our cue. Okay, unless we go to war with them, and those are the two options: treat other people with dignity or wipe them out before they wipe you out.
Don't do it, right?
Yeah. Okay. Adam shenishkachu chafetzim b'chatzero o b'chanuso hareze aveda b'derech chinuach. He says, let's say you find objects that are left in someone's courtyard or someone's market, someone's place of business. So this means that the person inadvertently left something there. And so therefore you have an obligation to protect them or watch them until the owner returns. And if a significant amount of time lapses and the owner has not returned, and again, it's hard to tell what this significant amount of time is. It will depend on the scenario. Then if it's something that has a distinctive marker, let's say you're walking through the marketplace and you see like a briefcase and with a laptop computer in it, and it's a busy area. Clearly somebody left it there, and after a certain amount of time, it seems like they may have just lost it or forgotten it there. So yeah, if it's something that has a distinctive marker, you'd have to do the mitzvah of Hashavas Aved until you have to announce that you found it until the owner is able to connect with you. And even if it doesn't have a siman, let's say it's a bunch of produce or something, you can't take possession of it. Why? Ella im hisna betchila alosam chafetzim she'ein bahem siman she'ein arotza lizkos bahem v'chashiyavor zman rav bevadei nisyashu habolam v'yachol lizkos bahem. until such time that you can ascertain with a fair level of certainty that the owner has given up hope of retrieving them. In other words, if it's within an hour of the time that they were left there, maybe the owner hasn't discovered that they're lost. We have this principle of Yeyush Shalom Midas Lo Havi Yeyush, that if a person left something there, but isn't aware yet that he's lost them,
How would you know?
it's an estimate. It's an estimate. Like how much time needs to elapse before a person gives up hope of retrieving this. So you have to estimate. There's really no way to know for certain.
But if somebody finds something in, say, somebody's store or in a shul, and they have a designated area that's called lost and found, would it be okay to put it in there instead of holding it yourself?
Presumably so, yeah. Yeah. That's generally what people do all the time. I hopefully when we get into the practical Shiloh part of this section, we'll see some practical halacha. Mitzias Sfarim v'hatipul b'ha, finding lost books. Imatza Sfarim korei b'hem echas l'shloshim yom. If you find lost books, Sfarim could also mean scrolls, because remember, when this halach is written, it was before the printing press. So you're supposed to open them up once every 30 days and read from them, because that's considered to be for the health of the scroll or the book. And if you don't know how to read, again, we're talking about a different world, right? You have to unfurl it and roll it back up once every 30 days. In other words, this is for the health of the scroll. To be medaftef, I guess, would mean to bang it. So in order to, let's see what the word ledaftef means. It's probably some kind of agitation of the object.
Rabbi, if you put the object into the lost and found, would you still have to publicize the fact that you found it and you put it in?
I think lost and found automatically means that you have to
Yeah,
go.
but you have to tell somebody that it's there. I mean, you found it,
You
responsible.
found it, you
is
take
to
it there.
post
Everyone knows
notice.
if they lost something, they go to the lost and found.
They're not.
I would think.
Is there an obligation to make a public announcement?
They lost it.
It's a good question. Presumably, there would be some kind of obligation to try and track down the owner and at least to notify them that something was left in the lost and found. I think, let's see how this halacha translates. It's a good question. Ledafdef is to browse through something, or to maybe just to flip through the pages in order to give the book or the scroll air so that it doesn't become moldy. But you're not allowed to pore over it to study new things, because we're worried that you may cause undue wear and tear on the book.
So you are allowed to read it, but you're not allowed to study it.
Correct. You're allowed to read through it if it's a text that you're familiar with. Let's say the Parshat HaShavua, you find a Chumash. You can use it, let's say, once every 30 days to follow along the Torah reading or to review the Parsha. But you shouldn't do it more than once every 30 days.
I find that pages, I have books at home that are 300 years old, slung. I find the pages are way better quality. It's
For sure.
like on a cloth.
They use
Yeah,
rag.
Yeah, it's like on a linen, as opposed to books you have today. After 100 years, they turn yellow.
They use different material. They use a rag pulp instead of a paper pulp. Yeah. Lo yikra v'yachzor v'lo yikra v'yitargem, nor should you read it and review it, nor should you read it and translate it. V'lo yihiyu shnaim korim b'shnei inyanim b'vasechas, nor should you allow two people to read from the same book from different places. Again, all of these could cause ripping or damage to the scroll or the book. Aval be'inyan echad mutar, but if they read from the same place, then it's okay. Uvishlosha anoshim afilu ba'oso inyan aser, but three people may not read it together. Michshash shekol echad yimshoch elav v'yikru et hadapim shebesefer, because you're worried that each person may get excited about the text and pull it towards him, and it'll end up tearing. V'din zeh haya bizmano. But this halacha was back in the day. Kevin shahasfarim shalahem k'sheshoim milotposcham misapshim. That back then, if you didn't unfurl a scroll, it could become moldy. The chol asfarim shalahem hayu asuyim beglila, and their works, their texts were on scrolls. V'hasfarim shalanu poscham al haruach shalo yisapshim. Today, our books, you just have to open them up every once in a while so that the air can circulate, and that's fine. Uchiyom bizmanenu shamatzui hashefa ba'otzas farm kimo gemaras tehillim sidur tefillah chedoyim molar tzadeya. Nowadays, where there's such a ubiquity of books, and there's so many svarim, and the world is filled with the knowledge. There's a lot of literacy. Amatzui liknosim tamid ve'enam svarim nidirim, and you can buy plenty of books and they're not that expensive. Nira dilachar shehichriz v'lobo haba'olim mutter laharich demeim u'lishtamesh bahem. That once you made your announcement and no one stepped forward, then as soon as, let's say, a significant amount of time goes by where you would expect someone who lost it to step forward, maybe 30 days, then you would be allowed to evaluate their value and then just use them right away. As we're going to see, when we say that something has to be munachat sheyavo Eliyahu, that's something you have to keep it until Eliyahu Hanavi comes, one option that you have, number one, if the item is perishable, you mark down its value, its estimated value, and you consume the item, okay? Just making a note in your notebook that you had found this thing and it was worth such and such, and you consumed it. So if the owner ever steps forward, you'll pay him the cash value. When it comes to books or anything that's not perishable, but normally you wouldn't be allowed to use it, if the owner hasn't stepped forward, make a note of how much the approximate value of this book, make a note of it, and then feel free to use it as your own. Or you could sell it. And if the owner steps forward afterwards, you can pay them for the value. Okay.
Hope they agree on the price.
Yeah, well, I mean, nowadays it's unless you're dealing with like an antique,
You could say like, that book was worth,
a lot of
It's all subjective at some points.
well, yeah, if it's just sentimental value, that doesn't play a role in halacha,
So Rabbi, if you found a gold ring, there's no simon on, there's no way of telling whose it was. You notify, 30 days goes by.
Well, sometimes, as we'll see, sometimes the place where it was found could be a simon. If a person can identify where it
My
was.
question is going to be more of the fact that if you started wearing it because you wanted to, right? Would you make a note of the value at the time? Because I mean, wearing it, you're gonna.
As soon as you start using it, you're not allowed to use a lost item for personal use. Once you start to do so, because the owner hasn't stepped forward, you have to make a note to yourself how much this item is worth
At that time.
at
Because
the
that
time,
could change a
because
year later.
it could change.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Next. Hamotzei Aveda v'hechzir l'makom shehaba'olim yotzim v'nichnasim v'roam osa. Afsha hamakom eino mishtamer. Now, if you find a lost object, but you put it in a place where people pass by there regularly, even if it's not a protected area, then you fulfilled the mitzvah of hashavas aveda. Maybe lahodia, right? I'm not sure. You don't have to know the owner regarding its return. There's some malformed, there's a malformed words here in the sentence. So that's the normal rule when you find chattel, when you find inanimate objects, simply placing them in a place where, let's say I find something in the park and I have no way of knowing who this belongs to, as long as you put it, let's say, in a conspicuous part of the park, You can, a lot of times it's best just to leave something where it was found with the assumption that the owner is going to come back for it, right? And that's like what we learned before, is that if you find something in a public space, and you feel that the owner would not have wanted it to be left there, or let's say overnight, and you see something in the park in the afternoon and it's still there in the morning. So is there a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda? Not necessarily. It may be best just to leave it there until the owner gets back. And here too, he's saying, place it in an area where people will pass by if you feel that the owner will pass by there and eventually come back to retrieve it. But that's only true about inanimate objects. Aval bevale chayim ein adin kain. But that's only true with inanimate objects. Let's say you find a cat or a dog, right?
Cat, I say that as dog.
We don't say that. Elechayev ba'achrayusim right. But you have to take care of them. Ad sheyikansu davka l'makom hamishtamer. Then you have to bring them into a protected area, because otherwise they're just going to run away. Kevin shuhurgalu lotzeis v'loleches strichim heim shemira me'ula. You need to guard them in a much superior fashion. So he's quoting here the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Reish Samad Zayin. I'm just looking at the footnote where the Shulchan Aruch writes, "Mitzvahs hashava im hu makir es bal ha'aveda chayiv l'tapel ba'ad shetagia liyad haba'olim o sheyachzirenu l'rishus haba'olim." That when you know who the owner is, let's say you found someone's garment and you know it belongs to so-and-so because it's got their name in it. So you have to treat it, with protection until the owner returns. Either you have to protect it until the owner comes back to retrieve it, or you return it to the owner. B'makom hamishtamer, it has to be in a protected area. And therefore, as long as you put it in the person's courtyard or garden, you were yotzei. Ve'ein tzarich das ba'alim. And you don't have to, the owner doesn't even have to be aware that it was returned to his backyard, as long as you put it in a place which you feel is safe and it'll be protected, then that's fine. However, the Taz is of the opinion that it's always lechatchila best to return it to the hands of the owner. So, in other words,
for that, if long as a person gets it back,
I suppose it's
reward.
no, it's just that you're going the extra mile to make sure that the person gets it. Let's say, like, the garment that you see this was left in the park. If you leave it there, there's a solid chance that they're going to get it. It's unlikely that someone else is going to come and want to take it for themselves. So maybe it's best just to leave it there. But there's not a solid guarantee that it's going to get back to them if you leave it there, because someone else may end up coming to take it. We know that there are people who go through our neighborhoods and pick up stuff that they find that's left out. So it may not be, you're not doing 100% of Hashavas Aveda by leaving it there. Okay? Okay. So it seems to be that there's a little bit of a discrepancy in the Psak Halacha as to whether, if you find something and you just leave it there with the assumption that the owner will eventually come and retrieve it because you know that he'll pass by there, whether that's sufficient or not. Is it better to leave it there, or is it better to pick it up and put it and return it back to the owner? There's a difference of opinion between the Machaber and the Taz. Okay.
So how's that
Hopefully,
worked out when you have focus two people in a similar time? Or, how long after is the Taz from the Shulchan Aruch?
probably a century, let's say. I'm not sure how much time there's between them, but the fact is that it's one of the classic commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. Many times we will go like the later commentary, but you have to look at the Achronim, the latter
Who makes that
poskim.
decision? Later
Yeah, usually it's the latter achronim, and sometimes it remains a machlokas, and a person has the latitude to paskin like either the machaber or the taz. Okay. Chayfetz she'avar zman rav me'az shenevad. If let's say a lot of time has passed from the time that it has been lost. Let's say you find a lost object, even if it has a distinctive marking. Kevin shenikar she'avar zman rav me'az shenevad mi ba'alav. But you can tell from its condition that it's been lost for a long time. I remember we talked about those guys that went down in a capsule to the Titanic, right? So if you find a shipwreck and you find lost items there, you can tell that they've been there for a significantly long time. Or so let's say the item has started to corrode or rust. Or let's say you find an umbrella in the summer. So that's an indication. It's likely, maybe not here in the summer, but maybe in Eretz Yisrael in the summer where it's very arid. So that's a good assumption that it's been lost for a while. O sandalim biyamot he means to say biyamot hachoref. That's a typo. Or if you find sandals during the winter. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Eina motzei tzarich lahachriz. V'zacha b'mitzia shekvar yisyashu haba olamei avedazu. You're allowed to assume that the owner has given up hope of retrieval, even if it has a siman. That there are certain times that the circumstance will indicate, or its condition will indicate, that the owner has really no interest in ever getting this back. You find a pair of flip-flops in January, in the park, right? So you know that the owner really has no interest in getting that back. Okay.
Even if his name is on it, you're not
machuyev.
it's all.
You're not machuyev. You can assume that there was yesh. You could go lifnim mishur sadin if you see a guy's name on it and you recognize who it is, then call him up. But if you don't know who the person is, you're still allowed to keep it. Okay, we'll hold it here for today.